I had wanted to talk today about festival foods and holidays, and to say that I believe that UU's, and our church in particular, needed them to bind us together, further bind us together. Napoleon has pointed out that armies travel on their stomachs. I think every group does. We will both celebrate our community and tie our youth to us, which is important, and our celebrations with traditions and with food. In that way, we encourage our youths not only to become wonderful adults, but lifelong UUs. Is this silly? Perhaps. But perhaps also we could design a holiday in what Lois brilliantly referred to the other day as the season of forgetting. We could combine our holiday with a drive for food and clothing for those who do without. And the sweetness of gathering in community matters, perhaps never more so than when we have experienced something like the Paris incident. For some reason, the baked potato, a food that is somewhere between 7,000 to 10,000 years old, comes from one single plant. They've traced it back to one single plant. Would be a staple for such a tradition, I think. I have more thoughts, and we'll talk. But Paris. Paris. Such a bold and ugly reminder that this violence is spreading and escalating. What do we say? What do we do? 128 people killed, at least that many wounded, and badly. Paris is gorgeous and a symbol for civilization and culture. Many of us have been there. These attacks were so intimate and personal. They deliberately targeted different sorts of people. They killed people in wheelchairs, the most vulnerable of people. I woke up yesterday realizing I can't preach the sermon I wrote. I'm sure it was a perfect sermon. I'm sorry you won't get to hear it. Right. I wrote, all right, I'm not sure that 7 hours of driving has crystallized my thoughts or working late at night and early this morning, but as with all of you, I'm working this through. Since yesterday, I've been thinking about the Jeremiah passage, chapter 31:15. It also shows up in Matthew. Thus saith God, a voice is heard in Ramah, bitter weeping and loud lamentation. Rachel is weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children because they are no more. Scott posted a picture on his Facebook from the Louvre where Venus seemed to look out the window for, as he said, waiting by her window, waiting for peace, waiting for sanity, waiting for her children to come home. Rachel and Venus have been waiting and weeping for quite a while. ISIL was founded in 1999. I refuse to call her by the name of a goddess. I refuse. It continues to flourish. Groups from other countries band together with them and increase their deadly reach. 2 days before Paris, they claimed 43 lives in Beirut. Interestingly, no one, myself among them, has suggested posting a cedar of Lebanon on their Facebook page. Because Beirut is not Paris for us. Mostly ISIL has operated somewhere else, and when Westerners have intervened, we've not been very effective. I thought yesterday that it seems as if fighting ISIL is a lot like dealing with lead. You know, you put your finger in the middle of it to stop it, and it just skitters into hundreds of little pieces. And mercury. I don't put my finger on lead. No. It doesn't do that. Right. It's not good for me. Mercury. That's it. Yeah, mercury's hard to find these days, too, since it's dipping down into the thermometer. But thank you. Mostly, ISIL has operated somewhere else. All right. But I just saw that Westerners have now agreed to step up the timetable for ceasefire and government change. Nice. Now that Parisians are dead. It was a problem before. It's estimated that over 210,000 people died in Syria alone. That's 1% of their population. many of them civilians. 3 million of them have fled to surrounding states. 6.5 million of them are displaced internally. That's 10%. And that's just Syria. And it's not just people. ISIL has very carefully targeted ancient cultural sites. But what do we do? And, you know, it was a little nervous-making because I like to have mulled over my sermons a long time and to have them well thought out and re-edited a little bit. And I didn't have that chance, and I talked to somebody this morning as I was walking to the restaurant, and she and her mom were walking out, and I said, I'm a little worried about how the sermon will go. And her mother, who's 90-something, leaned over and said, oh, honey, everybody's going to be asleep. They're not going to hear anything anyway. I said, thanks. I should have gone to bed at 10. Right. I kept remembering Martin Niemöller's poem. Do you remember this? He was a German Lutheran minister, originally a supporter of Hitler, who then became an outspoken critic and was then interned in Dachau. He said then, first they came for the socialists, but I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, but I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, but I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak. And now they have come for us. What is there to do? How do we speak out? I don't believe it's too late. I believe that there is room for peace. But how do we look beyond our own concerns to those of the rest of the world? President Hollande has declared war. And in fact, ISIL probably welcomes that, this tiny little group with France and all of the West against them. They look to increase their image of effective martyrdom. It's hard to blame Hollande. To have people sneaking into your country and killing them? Your citizens are not safe. You look weak, and these attacks require so few people to overset civilization. They have people who go happily to their death. England also worries. Gatwick was closed yesterday. It's ghastly. In 15 years, it doesn't seem we've made progress in understanding how to stop this tide of fear. And yet I fear that we'll compound our mistakes and repeat them as our leaders go off to the summit on the heels of this disaster. These fanatics are mostly young, disaffected youth. They are seduced with visions of righteousness and purity, which is heady when you're 18. They are willing to kill themselves because they believe in the cause and the afterlife. Too many seem to have no other reason to live, no good jobs or careers, and so they foment trouble. What could be effective? What do I know? And yet, more war, more fear. Even the young naval officer that I spoke to in Newport this weekend, there to attend the War College, admitted that so far guns have not made a difference, and more were unlikely to do that. How do we stop reinforcing insanity? Does retributive justice even exist? Is it justice when more are killed? Is it all right to make Syrian civilians collateral damage when we're so horrified by a small number of Parisians being killed? What else do we do? And certainly we're hearing mutterings all over about the refugees and this being their fault. That was fairly neatly routed on social media with this tweet by a man by the name of Dan Holloway. He said to people blaming the refugees for the attacks in Paris tonight, do you not realize that these are the people the refugees are trying to escape from? But all of this is at a very macro level, and we live right here in the Susquehanna Valley. What can we do right here to make a difference? ISIL is not going to respond to any petition we create to cease and desist. I think we can keep paying attention to justice issues, both here and abroad. Small communities such as ours can do small projects. I loved this. Two women from the States, I think it was California, but I don't remember, It was one of those fleeting things, noticed that many of the refugees were carrying their babies in addition to everything else they'd brought. So they collected baby wraps from all over and flew over to take them to the refugees so the women could tie on their babes. And there were much tears and much happiness all around. People were thrilled. So little. In our own country, am I the only one who has noticed, I'm sure I'm not, that while all this turmoil is going on at Missouri State, where kids of color are being targeted and threatened, no group has come forward to stand with the black and others and offered to walk them to classes and home at night? It would be so simple, and it would change feelings for how things are going there, for the students who feel afraid. It could be dangerous. It's true. Why should the danger be theirs? We can be mournful for all of the dead, injured, threatened, displaced, all of the dead, all the displaced. Someone commented in shock that the Magic Kingdom in Paris is closed. I've seen complaints that the rock concerts and tours have been postponed, when I think the musicians are only acting responsibly to not gather people into small. But I had a ticket. I heard some, and people are crazy after these things happen, but somebody said, this is very inconvenient. The subways are closed. Like, people are dead. It's inconvenient. Hello, first world problems. And if I were any of these performers, I would vote for my own safety and for not endangering people by gathering them so it can happen again. But at least some of what I hear and see on social media is sadness over the interruption of privileged life, without an understanding of the reality of a complete loss of that life for so many. 10 million people with no home to go to. We can continue to serve the living. Tomorrow I'm up and off to speak on the Sunrise Show about the Love Project and Love Period. We make peace by doing our work where we are. We can always give money to the asylum cause. I'm sure the UUSC is working on this. And still, we can be mindful of the stories of success and spread them. My friend Lorraine still lives in the little town where I went to school in Sweden. And I was talking to her yesterday because a friend of mine over here has called to say, I have heard stories that, white women are being raped by all of these asylum seekers, and no one's doing anything because they're too politically correct. So I went on Google and I looked things up, and I looked them up in English. I tried to look them up in Swedish. There's not one Swedish story about it, and there are stories about it in English, and they're all in Aryan papers. And so when I talked to Lorraine, I said, so I'm hearing this. What are you hearing? And she goes, that's propaganda. There are about 18,000 people that live in her town. In the last few years, the town made the decision and has implemented taking in 1,000 asylum seekers. And by and large, people are quite content to have these new neighbors. People from the desert are learning how to bicycle and how to swim so they can enjoy what Sweden offers and get around to shop and take their children to daycare. Here in our valley, one constructive thing I can think to do is for us to start being more public about our friendships and more deliberate. I wrote Friday night to Nina and Sonia, Nina who's the rabbi, Sonia who's the head of the mosque, and said, first, should the three of us do a Dunkin' Donut coffee date? Sonia and I do that from time to time. We sit there, we giggle, and everybody looks. But secondly, should the Jews, the Muslims, and the UUs go see some silly Disney movie with no sex and violence, so our Muslim friends can join us? Should we simply get out in the world and let people see a mixed crowd having a good time? Should we just be good neighbors? And it doesn't have to be the whole crowd. We can all be deliberate about reaching across boundaries to make friends. For those of us who are white, we have the privilege of invitation. I had said most importantly, but at least importantly, I think, we gather. We remember that this is our home. We remember that we have some place to come when we are confused or saddened. We come together and remember that we have 7 principles to lean on, to guide us. We remember that we have friends here and the opportunity to know one another better. When I think about the asylum seekers, what is now central to their life is the loss of all they've ever known of home. They lost home when it was being bombed. They lost home when they made the courageous or perhaps just inevitable decision to leave. Even if they return, their home will be forever altered by war. Their small children may never know a settled home. How will they create a settled life, a settled country, if they're ever allowed to return? Did I talk to you guys about, I can't remember if I wrote a message about having gone to Zion Lutheran a couple weeks ago. You can't remember either, so maybe I didn't, or we won't say maybe you didn't read it. But so I was invited over there, and I thought they were looking for us to join them in a social like exploration of movies and problems, and they weren't. They were looking to understand just exactly what this UUism is anyway. And if I'd thought about it, I might have been prepared, and I'd had my little cards and my little. But you'll be happy to know I remembered all of the 7 principles, almost all of them without singing the song. Right, right, you know. But it's helpful. Admit it, it's helpful. Especially like 5 and 6, which goes in which way. But they kept grilling me because, first they wanted to know things like, well, what does your service look like? It must be so, different. And I said, well, I think you'd recognize it. My father was a Presbyterian. He came here and he's like, oh, I know this. I know these tunes. Oh, nice words. Yeah. But what they couldn't understand was how we could work without a foundation. And I said, no, we have a foundation. Here are our 7 principles. I just went through them. Those are our foundation. Well, but they're not. Well, but we think they are. And then they thought it was odd that we actually could do good stepping away from those foundations, stepping from that foundation. And so they were a little suspicious as to whether or not it was a good thing that we were doing. And I kept saying, look, we're feeding hungry children. How could that be? But I don't think they'll be joining us with monies. But it seemed so foreign to them that we would encourage our comrades in faith to keep digging, keep searching for better, deeper, and perhaps different truths from those we espouse. We have that together, and it really is a lot. As I was driving yesterday and driving, actually, isn't 84 a long way? Yeah, dark too, but I stopped the red line. But, I don't listen to music for some reason in the car. I'm silent, and I thought I would be working on the sermon, but I was a little road stupid. But I amused myself for a while planning new space, interestingly, outdoor space, and I thought, maybe we need a copse of apple trees outside our worship space, trees of wisdom, with an invitation to the world, please, take a bite. What faith community doesn't need that outside their door? We could even make wisdom cider. And I won't tell Scott that the father of this new baby has just started working for a not-for-profit that is going to grow medical marijuana. We have space. It's good to have not-for-profit. Anyway. What?
Does that have to do with planting stuff?
I thought so. No, actually, I see it as the way to, I know we won't do this, but I do see it as the way you grow the crop, you take the money, you do good for the kids and adults who need it, and we feed children. Ooh. No, I know. That's like my planning the kitchen. I know that. I won't be cooking, I won't be raising crops. I took the extinguishing the chalice quote from another service. It wasn't particularly appropriate to my sermon on food, but it turns out to have been wildly appropriate to talking about peace and freedom. The Robeson quote is from the pages of our worship book. And Tom Bresenhan is going to read another quote, also found from in the back of the book. I don't know whether that's where you took it from, but it is in our book, I believe, to end this sermon. We are rich in inspirational resources. We can lean on them as we lean on one another. In the moment of silence that comes after, I'm going to ask all of us to consider what one thing each of us might do. What one small step could you take? What one could you participate in that would break our horrified paralysis or our frightened bluster? The older I get, and indeed watching our babies have babies reminds me that I am indeed aging, as does the 7-hour drive, the more I believe that both peace and prayer are active as well as passive verbs. It is good to sit still and open. It is good to put our hearts out into the world. Let us pray. Let us peace. Let us remember we are in very good company. It is good to be together. It is so good to be home and to consider how to be home to a larger group of people. Blessed be.